All right, sports fans, how's everybody out there doing? William Martin coming at you one more time here on YouTube with another edition of the 300 Pounds of Sports Knowledge Podcast. Now, a phenomenal college football season is in the books as the Michigan Wolverines are the national champions for the first time, in 26 years. Now, vindication for Jim Harbaugh. He's 86 and 25 in his 9 years at Michigan. But after that subpar 2-4 campaign back in 2020, there were some who were questioning whether Harbaugh could get it done. But ever since then, he and Michigan have been on a roll. And they've only lost 3 games over the last 3 years. And they've done it in grand fashion. They've beaten Ohio State in each of the last 3 years, a team that Harbaugh had struggled with to start at Michigan. And then, of course, in beating Ohio State, you're able to get to the Big Ten championship game. And of course, there, Michigan has won all three. So you beat Ohio State, you win the Big Ten, you get to the college football playoff. And of course, Harbaugh's first two trips to the college football playoff with Michigan weren't that good. Michigan, took the field against Georgia a couple of years ago in the Orange Bowl, and Georgia just literally flexed their muscles on them in more ways than one. They got back there last year and were favored against TCU, and you can call it Michigan shooting themselves in the foot, or TCU just being better than most people expected. But at the end of the day, Michigan was sent home with another frustrated big loss on the big stage. But with all of that, Michigan and Harbaugh, with what they did last night, they were able to exercise a slew of demons, as not only did they win the big game, but they did it emphatically. You go back to the last night's contest, and honestly, this game swung in Michigan's favor as soon as Washington won the coin toss and deferred. The Wolverines got that football. They used that old school smash mouth Bo Schembechler, who was Jim Harbaugh's college coach at Michigan, that same mentality. We're going to line up with the big uglies up front and we're going to run it right down your throats. And that's what they did on that opening drive. And of course, it culminated with Donovan Edwards with that 41-yard touchdown run. Got the folks, in maize and blue going at NRG Stadium. They took the 7-0 lead. Washington was able to respond with a field goal, but then as soon as the Wolverines got the football back, it was some more of the same tried and true formula. We're going to run the football effectively, aggressively, and consistently. And it was again another big run from Donovan Edwards to give Michigan the 14-3 lead. So you look at it as a whole last night. Michigan had 303 yards on the ground. 134 of those came from their heart and soul in Blake Corum. And then, of course, 104 from Donovan Edwards. And it just was not about this Michigan offensive line. It just was not about their running backs. It was also about this Michigan defense, as they made life difficult for Washington quarterback Michael Penix Jr. all night long. Penix Jr., who was probably going to be a first-round pick in April's NFL draft, was 27 of 51 passing last night for 255 with a touchdown and a pair of picks. He was never on it all night long. He just never got into that rhythm. And even when he had guys open, and I mean wide open, he was missing it because honestly, there were several plays. You go back to the fourth down play in the first half, where if Penix connects with his receivers, it's a touchdown. But you know what? It's one of those where when you got pressure coming at you from so many different angles, you don't know where it's coming from. You don't know who's going to go out there and hit you. Sometimes you get a little jumpy. Sometimes you throw that ball a little earlier. And that's not a slight on Michael Penix. I think that is more of a credit to what this Michigan defense did, not only last night, but throughout this entire college football season. And, that Huskies explosive offense was never able to get going. And I know that I did pick Washington coming into this game, but even when I talked about this contest, I said, look back at that Arizona State game. I know that the Huskies won that game at home 15-7, but Arizona State frustrated Washington that night in Seattle with their pass rush. And I guarantee you that Michigan looked at that game tape, and especially they have a better defense. No disrespect to Arizona State, but the Wolverines do have a better defense than the Sun Devils. And they utilized that last night as they consistently brought the pressure. Another thing that hurt Washington was an ineffective Dylan Johnson. And I know what Dylan Johnson has meant to Washington's offense all season long, but he hasn't been healthy for a while. And he's still been able to go, but he aggravated that foot injury even more in the Sugar Bowl win over Texas. And then, to have the quick turnaround, obviously for the national championship was a hard ask. And it's one of those, if you're Kalen DeBoer, I know that Dylan Johnson's the heart and soul of your offense, and I know what he means out there. But you could see last night he wasn't his full self. He was probably about 75%. You see that he didn't have that full burst, and it might have been a decision that needed to have been made. Whereas you know what, you just got to sit Dylan Johnson down and get somebody else in there because you had no decoy at running back because Michigan's defense did not fear Washington's running game. They knew that you were one dimensional, and it took away from what this offense can do. You can get away with that maybe against a so-so defense if you're Washington, but not against the top defense in the nation this year. But getting back to Michigan, Jim Harbaugh and company, they were on a mission since the Fiesta Bowl, and it's one of those. It was kind of like one of those things. If we're going to lose again, it's going to be over my dead body. And you had basically 100 guys, players, and coaches that bought into that. And they were on that mission all season long. And they played like a band of brothers. And that's why they won. I mean, you think about it, everything, every piece of adversity that Michigan faced this year brought them closer together. You think back to Harbaugh, not being there for the first 3 games of the season. They were like, okay, fine, no problem. His second suspension of the year, which saw him miss their final 3 games of the regular season. As soon as the suspension was announced, of course, the Michigan players went to Twitter and they basically were like, bet. So what happened that Saturday? They went to Happy Valley. They beat a good Penn State team. They went on the road after that. They beat a good Maryland team. And then in the big house to finish the regular season against the Ohio State. And it's one of those where, a lot was at stake because, not only do you win the Big Ten East, you get to the Big Ten championship game, but the loser of that contest was all but eliminated from the college football playoff. And Michigan went out there and handled their business in that game, sans Jim Harbaugh. So, of course, they got Harbaugh back for the Big Ten championship game, took care of their business there. But I think a telling moment for this team came last week in the Rose Bowl because you go back to the first play of that game when J.J. McCarthy throws the interception, and then, of course, it was overturned due to the fact that Caleb Downs of Alabama had stepped out of bounds and didn't reestablish himself. After that point, McCarthy did get settled down. But even though Michigan was trailing late in that game, offensively and defensively, they made the key plays to win. Uh, I think forcing the fumble on Jalen Milroe was big because at that point, Alabama's up 17-13. Their offense has gotten it going. And if Alabama scores a touchdown there, it's going to be very hard for Michigan to come back on them. But then down even late, 20-13 in the fourth quarter, your offense hadn't done anything, was fourth down. And then you look to your leaders in those situations to make plays. And that's what Blake Corum did. He made that big play on fourth down, got that Wolverine offense going. They scored to force the game into overtime. And then, of course, it was Blake Corum and this defense that took over. And I think once Michigan won that game, their their confidence, everything went to the next level. And of course, we've seen it with other teams, we've seen it with other programs. before for Clemson for so many years. They couldn't get over that hump. They finally beat LSU in that Peach Bowl, and of course, the rest is history. You think back to when Nick Saban was at LSU and he was looking to establish himself there. They beat Tennessee in that SEC championship game, and of course, the rest is history. And I can go on and on and on about a litany of programs where they need that defining moment, that defining win. And Michigan got that defining win, and they just carried that momentum, obviously, in my opinion, over to last night's championship game against Washington. And then, of course, the rest is history. So you just look back at it because it's not just about Harbaugh, it's about his coaches, it's about his players, and there's leadership on this team. You think of the JJ McCarthy's, the Blake Corums, the guys who came back, for moments like this. And, they're there when everybody doubted them. And now they to the victors go to spoils, as they are the kings of the mountain. But speaking of Jim Harbaugh, did he possibly just coach his final game at his alma mater? He possibly did, because if you're Harbaugh, you're looking at it, the NCAA investigation is still coming. And it's one of those where maybe if you leave, maybe the NCAA, pulls away from Michigan and leaves them alone. Maybe, possibly. Also, if you're Jim Harbaugh, you know what? You've reached the top of the mountain in college. Do you want to stay there and try to do it again, or do you want to go back to the National Football League where you had success before? I mean, in 4 years as the head coach of the San Francisco 49ers, we're talking about a Jim Harbaugh that was 44-19 and 1, got this team to 3 NFC championship games, one Super Bowl, was within an eyelash of winning a Super Bowl championship. Of course, he lost to his brother, John, with the Baltimore Ravens, but it's still, that what if on his resume. And I think the only way, because I mean, the last couple of years, Jim Harbaugh has flirted with going back to the National Football League. But I think there are, or could be, and there are some compelling uh, coaching vacancies out there. And it's not just the coaching vacancies, it's coaching vacancies, and there are also general manager vacancies. And the reason why I bring that up is because Harbaugh is definitely going to want to have some type of say in personnel decisions should he decide to return to the National Football League. More than likely, it's going to happen. I'm not going to say it is fully until we see it, but nonetheless, I think there's a pretty strong possibility that Jim Harbaugh has just coached his last game in Michigan. If he has, he leaves a strong legacy there, because you're looking at it like this: Michigan has not won a national championship since 1997. And I'm not saying it like it's a bad thing, because national championships don't come around the bend that often. It's just the fact that, we've seen Nick Saban in Alabama dominate things, over the last, 15 years or so on the college football circuit, that, some people think that it comes that easy. It does not. But nonetheless, it's still one of those where, it still definitely has to be respected. And you got to respect, what Michigan has been able to do, what Harbaugh has been able to do, going back to his alma mater and winning. And, it's one of those where, people forget before Harbaugh went back to Michigan, they had really fallen on hard times. They tried the transition from Lloyd Carr to Rich Rodriguez. That was a train wreck from the word go. You brought in Brady Hoke. It was a flash year, but it wasn't consistent. And Michigan needed to get back to the basics. And Harbaugh did have some solid years to start off, but of course, it was always that what if, because he couldn't beat Ohio State, couldn't beat Urban Meyer, couldn't beat, top 10, top five teams. And, in the last couple of years, he's righted those wrongs brick by brick. So it's one of those where, you know what, when you win, that's all that matters. That's that, at the end of the day. So I think Harbaugh definitely leaves a solid uh legacy at Michigan should he decided to depart here in 2024. But I will say this, the Michigan Washington contest, which, historically has been typically reserved for the Rose Bowl, will now be very intriguing with Washington set to join the Big Ten, and not just set to join the Big Ten. Michigan and Washington are going to face each other in this upcoming college football season. And I guarantee you, when these two clash, the folks from Ann Arbor will be more than happy to remind the folks of Seattle what happened last night. Remember, the last time Washington won a national championship, they beat the same Michigan school in the Rose Bowl. Granted, the stakes were a lot different, more than 30 years ago, but nonetheless, it's still the sentimental aspect of it. But nonetheless, last night was a tremendous end to what was a phenomenal college football season that was also bittersweet. And I say this because I've talked about this before. It's still a topic that's going to be resonating with a lot of people. But it's the end of this edition of the Pac-12, and there's a lot of tradition right there, unfortunately, that is going to the wayside. With so many teams going to the Big Ten, so many teams going to the Big 12, ACC, you name it. And, we got to still wait and see what Washington State and Oregon State are going to do with things. More than likely, I do believe the Mountain West is going to merge with them, and, we'll take it from there. But even with that said, it's never going to be the same. Then, we have this expanded Big Ten going from 14 to 18 teams. And then, of course, the expanding SEC when Texas and Oklahoma are set to join. And of course, I think these two heavyweights are going to continue to slug it out as the race is going to be on, in spite of the fact that they want to deny it, for 20 teams. So not only that, but what is going to become of Florida State and their battle with the ACC over grants of rights? And I think that is going to be the next big domino to fall on the college football scene, because if Florida State can get out of that and they don't have to pay the ACC the money that the ACC wants them to pay, or at least all of it, I think that's going to open the door, because Florida State, they're not the only unhappy camper, if you will, currently in the ACC. So I think if Florida State leaves, the floodgates are going to open, and they're going to take some teams with them, and it could be the beginning of the end of the Atlantic Coast Conference, at least as we know it. Now I know Cal, Stanford, and SMU are set to join the league this year, but yeah, nonetheless, it ain't going to be the same if Florida State and others do decide to leave. How will the new Big 12 look? You got Arizona, Arizona State, Utah, and Colorado all coming into the league. And that league could be up for grabs, with, Texas and Oklahoma both going to the SEC. Transition time for Washington State and Oregon State. They're going to basically be de facto football independence, at least for this year, if you will. We've got an expanding college football playoff that's set to begin next season, of course, going from 4 to 12. And I know it's going to take, some things away. And like I've talked about, the widening gap between the haves and the have-nots, and also the widening gaps between the big bowl games and the other bowl games. And I've talked about this before, and I'm not the only one to say it. It's basically going to turn those bowl games that are not a part of the playoff into the NIT. But with that said, it's one of those where there are some who want to say, well, you know what, it's going to take away from conference championship weekend. Yes and no, because there's still going to be some teams that are going to get into this field of 12 that might not even make the conference championship game in their respective leagues. So there's still going to be a battle there. And there's also going to be a battle to get those top four seeds, because, of course, if you get those to one of those top four seeds, you get a first round bye, and you don't have to take part in that first round game. You get that additional rest. So we have to see how all of this plays out in year number one under this 12-team system. But getting back to this four-team system real quick, I think it's quite telling that the first year of the college football playoff saw a Big Ten team when it beat a Pac-12 team doing it. And not only that, they did it within the state of Texas. Of course, we saw Ohio State beat Oregon in Arlington. And of course, this time around, it was Michigan beating Washington in Houston. So you look at it, and of course, Michigan winning last night adds a new wrinkle to the Ohio State Michigan rivalry because of course, if you're from Ohio State, you want to see your team win, but you don't want to see Michigan win either. And then, of course, if you're from Michigan, you want to see your team win, but you darn sure don't want to see Ohio State win. So now you've got a Michigan team that's won the national championship. You've got a Michigan team that's beaten Ohio State 3 years in a row. And that game next November in Columbus could be very telling in this rivalry. So there's going to be a lot on the table, possibly when these two juggernauts meet next November in the Horseshoe. You look at it, the road to Atlanta begins now. As the race is going to be on to hoist that championship next January. Some teams to keep an eye on as some of the front runners so far. Georgia, I think, is going to once again be loaded up. Texas, Alabama, Ohio State, you got to keep an eye on. Notre Dame and Florida State, just to name a few. I'll be talking about this over the summer when it's top 25 time, but these are just some teams that I'm throwing out there for right now. Some other questions that possibly need to be answered heading into next season. Will this be a make or break year for Billy Napier at Florida? He's 11-14 so far at Florida, 6-10 in the SEC overall. Has not had a winning season in his 2 years at Gainesville. Did get the Gators to a bowl game in 2022. Went 5-7 this year. Of course, losing your starting running back in the track in the and Etienne to the transfer portal is going to be big. But let's see how the Gators do respond for next season. Speaking of that transfer portal, you got some big names that have been on the move there. You got Quinshawn Judkins going from Ole Miss to Ohio State. That's big. Riley Leonard, the star quarterback at Duke, going to Notre Dame now. DJU going from Oregon State to Florida State. KJ Jefferson going from Arkansas to UCF. These are just some of the big names that are on the move, in the transfer portal. Hugh Freeze's second year at Auburn. This is a guy who can just flat out coach. And I think there are some people that are meant to coach in certain conferences. Hugh Freeze is meant to coach in the SEC, and I think it's only a matter of time before he gets things turned around at Auburn. Mario Cristobal at Miami. He's 12-13 so far at his alma mater. He's only 6-10 in the ACC so far, and he's a phenomenal recruiter. But the folks definitely want to see the results on Saturday. So will this be a make or break year for Cristobal at the U? We just got to simply wait and see. Year number 2 for Coach Prime at Colorado, and of course, going back to September, Deion Sanders was the talk of the college football world. Of course, we saw the Colorado Buffaloes get off to that strong 3-0 start. However, it was not the same when Pac-12 play began. They went 1-8 in the Pac-12. Of course, they finished 4-8 overall. Had their struggles on defense, had their struggles on the offensive line. So it's going to be interesting to see how Coach Prime and company are able to fix those problems as he heads into year number 2. Not just year number 2 in Colorado, but also going from the Pac-12 to the Big 12. So you just look at the 2024 college football season. There's going to be some adjustments, of course. It's a transition. We've got to see how the 4 Pac-12 teams going to the Big 10, how that's going to work out for all parties involved. The 4 Pac-12 teams going to the Big 12, how's that going to work out? Cal and Stanford going to the ACC, Oklahoma and Texas going to the SEC. A lot of things are on the horizon as it's all about this now 12 team college football playoff. But with that all said and done, I think this was a phenomenal year for college football. And I think even bigger and better things are on the horizon for 2024. But nonetheless, everybody's going to be chasing Michigan as they are truly indeed the kings of the mountain. So, folks, that's going to wrap it up. And as always, I want to take this time out to thank all of you for tuning into the 300 Pounds of Sports Knowledge podcast here on YouTube. I want to take this time out to thank all of you fine folks out there for tuning in. And if you haven't already, please feel free to subscribe to this channel. Now, if you're on the X, formerly known as Twitter, please feel free to follow me at 300 Pounds of Sports. And like I always say, if you follow me, it'll be my pleasure to follow you right back. There's also the sports discussion group on Facebook at the Sports Depot 365. Now you can check it out, drop a line, and be a part of one of the better sports debating sites going on social media. So once again, fine folks, my name is William Martin, and I am signing off. And I'm saying take care and have yourselves a wonderful day.